Minutes.
I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the subject of my special order.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to tell the story of my constituent Jennifer Kepner and to call for immediate action on the most pressing public health issue facing our veterans: toxic military burn pits. 4 years ago, I met a veteran named Jennifer Kepner at her home in Cathedral City, California, in my district. Jennifer, a 39-year-old mother of 2, was one of the most inspiring and brave people I have ever met. And that kitchen table conversation was one of the most impactful conversations in my life. When I met her, she was cachectic. You can see her bones. She was wasting away. She was battling pancreatic cancer on chemotherapy. You can see the port in her chest, and you can see the loss of hair. And she was still very full of energy inside to tell her story and sound the alarm. Her doctor linked her exposure to burn pits during her service overseas. You see, she was described as a health nut, as someone thin, healthy, who liked to run and jog. Her friends would say she was one of those crazy people that would wake up at 4 in the morning and go on a 5-mile run routinely. So when she came down with pancreatic cancer at such a young age, her physicians looked at her DNA, her family history, and they concluded that the most likely cause, given her low risk, was her exposure to toxic military burn pit smoke. I sat with her in her home as she told me her story. She told me about her military service as an Air Force medic, caring for our men and women in uniform who were injured or sick. You see, she was stationed at Ballard Air Force Base in Iraq. She told me about her husband and their 2 children, Adia and Wyatt, who she loved so very dearly. And she told me about burn pits, these huge fields where military burns trash, anything and everything, including batteries, jet fuel, and medical waste, and plastics, and other hazardous material, causing service members to inhale toxic chemicals, carcinogens, and particulate matter. They call it the crud, you see, because after a long day in the desert, serving our country, they go to their camp wanting a little rest, and they smell this black toxic chemical smoke, and they get the soot in their face, in their nostrils, in their throat. They have itchy eyes, runny nose, a sore throat, they cough, and that's just another day at a base serving our country. Jennifer spent her last month as a leading voice for her fellow veterans exposed to burn pits, which she called the Agent Orange of our generation. Wow. The Agent Orange of our generation. We all are infuriated with the way that our Vietnam veterans were denied and their care was delayed and their recognition had been postponed when they were saying that we're sick. Their children are born malformed, they're infertile, they have other issues and syndromes and symptoms that are life-threatening and debilitating. And she is saying that this is the Agent Orange of our generation, and she knew that she was going to die. She knew that her days were limited. She knew that pancreatic cancer is the most aggressive cancer that causes death within months after diagnosis. She didn't give up. She didn't give up. despite the VA denying her the recognition that it was the burn pits that caused her pancreatic cancer, she didn't give up. Despite the VA denying her the benefits that she needed for her family, she didn't give up. And her dying wish was to ensure two things. One was that other veterans didn't have to struggle through a system that denied and delayed and did not recognize her illness. So that she said, let's help other veterans. And the second was, please help my husband Ben get the benefits to care for my children. In her last dying days, she was thinking of others with that heart of a servant and the fierce determination of a warrior. And I remember getting the call when I was in my district office that she was dying. And she would potentially die within a few hours. And I fell to my knees and I cried. I composed myself and I thought, as a physician, there's only certain things that I can do in the art and science of medicine. But I know that there's a greater healer, that there's a greater power, and perhaps this is what I can bring to serve the family at this moment. So I invited my pastor, Gerald Sharon, to come with me so we can pray with her on her deathbed. And there she was, taking her last breaths. Her mother was there crying. Her husband was trying to keep it together. Her children were at her side. The youngest one was too young to understand what was happening. The older one, the daughter, was a little more aware, but she was trying to keep it together. We did our prayer, and she died on October 18th, 2017. And since then, it has been my mission to make her vision a reality. Her story drove me to found the bipartisan, bicameral Congressional Burn Pits Caucus with my friend and colleague, Congressman Brad Wenstrup of Ohio. Her story inspired me to work with brilliant minds across the aisle, like my friend who's sitting here, Representative Gus Bilirakis, who cares deeply about this issue, to introduce legislation in a bipartisan manner. And her strength inspired me to co-author my bipartisan, bicameral legislation, the Presumptive Benefits for Warfighters Exposed to Burn Pits and Other Toxins Act, to give veterans the benefits and care they have earned and need and deserve. And her vision is reflected in the Honoring Our Promise to Address Comprehensive Toxics Act, or the Honoring Our Pact Act, which includes my legislation to keep our nation's promise to our veterans to take care of them after they serve our nation. And her stories and the countless of other veteran stories that you will hear today by Republicans and Democrats are speaking to us beyond the grave to act now with urgency for their fellow veterans and for their families. And under the leadership of our great chairman of the VA committee, Chair Mark Takano, we will get this done. You see, we cannot sit by while the veterans Jennifer served with are denied the health care and benefits they have earned and deserve. No one who has served and sacrificed for our nation should have to face the trials that she endured to get the medical care that she needed, or their widows the benefits to support their families with the life of dignity. In 1 week, we will celebrate Veterans Day and show our appreciation for all those who served our nation in our armed forces. Some will wear red, white, and blue attire. Some will even go as far as to make public displays of hugging a flag. And some will always say the same old thing, thank you to our veterans, thank you to our veterans for your service. I have said consistently that our veterans appreciate the thanks, but they really need pragmatic support. And the way on Memorial Day we memorialize and honor the dead is by serving the living and improving their lives. Look, they might have survived the battlefield, but they are dying from their exposures of a self-inflicted Department of Defense wound to our men and women in uniform by using these burn pits that, by the way, are illegal and banned in the United States precisely for their public health hazards. So we need pragmatic support, not lip service or empty gestures in our appreciation and celebration on Veterans Day. We must act now and get our veterans the health care and benefits they've earned when we sent them to war for our country. Service members are returning home from the battlefield right now, only to become delayed casualties of war, dying years later from constrictive bronchiolitis, pulmonary fibrosis, brain cancer, breast cancer, pancreatic cancer, gastric cancers, and autoimmune diseases caused by their exposure to the toxic hundreds of chemicals from burnt plastics, jet fuels, and hazardous materials that they inhaled while serving our nation. The DOD and the VA cannot continue to neglect this self-inflicted wound on our veterans. So in Jennifer's name and the countless names of the veterans who have suffered and some succumb to their illnesses due to their exposures to burn pits, we all will continue fighting tooth and nail to protect our service members and our veterans from toxic burn pits. She would never turn her back on a fellow veteran. And as a nation, neither can we. So with that, I yield to my friend, my neighbor, and the chairman of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, a true champion for our veterans and the sponsor of the Honoring Our Pact Act, Chair Mark Takano.
Well, I thank my neighbor and very good friend, Congressman Dr. Raul Ruiz, for holding and hosting this special order hour on toxic exposures. Madam Speaker, tonight I rise to talk about the urgent need to finally recognize toxic exposure as a cost of war and pass the Honoring Our Pact Act. Every day I hear more and more veterans who have been, I hear from more and more veterans who have been exposed to toxic substances while serving our nation. Whether it's exposure to burn pits, contaminated water, radiation, or other toxins, the health effects are often severe, from chronic multi-symptom illnesses to cancers, birth defects, infertility, and respiratory conditions. This problem isn't new, and neither is the need for congressional intervention. As chairman of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs, I was proud to lead the effort last Congress to pass the Blue Water Navy Vietnam Veterans Act and get long overdue justice for our Vietnam veterans exposed to Agent Orange. But that took more than 40 years. We cannot let our post-9/11 veterans suffer the same fate. And yes, we are in danger of having burn pits become this generation of veterans Agent Orange. We cannot allow this generation of veterans to go the 40 years that our Vietnam veterans had to wait for their justice. When we send our service members into harm's way, we do so with a promise to care for them and pay for that care. We haven't been keeping up our end of the deal. Hundreds of thousands of veterans have signed up for VA's burn pit registry. However, with 70% of burn pit claims denied, it's clear that VA's current disability benefit claims process isn't working. No veteran should be forced to prove that their government exposed them to toxic substances. The Honoring Our Pact Act fixes that and finally makes good on our promise. With our bipartisan legislation, we can deliver VA benefits and care to up to 3.5 million veterans exposed to burn pits and airborne hazards. We can establish a presumption of service connection for 23 respiratory illnesses and cancers, the most comprehensive list out there. Additionally, we can streamline VA's review process for toxic exposure presumptions so Congress doesn't have to keep intervening. And with the exit from Afghanistan still fresh in our minds, we cannot forget that the true cost of war is so much more than the tanks, planes, and weapons used on the battlefield. Veterans living with toxic exposure are still in the heat of battle, and they're paying for the cost of war that our nation should be paying. And that is why we need to pass the Honoring Our Pact Act into law. With 60 co-sponsors, bipartisan support, endorsements from 9 veteran service organizations, and a VA Secretary and President who are committed to addressing this issue, we have the momentum to get this done. And with every day that passes, more veterans get sick and sadly die waiting for the care and benefits they've earned, and we must act now. So again, I want to thank Dr. Ruiz and the Congressional Burn Pits Caucus for partnering with my committee to share the stories of toxic exposed veterans today and showcase how transformative passing the Honoring Our Pact Act will be. With Veterans Day right around the corner, we can honor our veterans' service with action, and I urge all members to consider sponsoring our legislation. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. I now yield to my friend and colleague, Congressman Castro from Texas, who is a member of the Congressional Burn Pits Caucus.
Thank you, Congressman Ruiz, for organizing this. I rise today to share the story of Marine Corporal William Godsa, Jr. William joined the Marines in the summer before 9/11. His first deployment was to Iraq in 2003, where he participated in the fall of Baghdad. It was there during war where he was exposed to burn pits. When I met William, he told me that he and his fellow Marines would sleep and work around burn pits 24/7. These burn pits were as big as football fields, burning tires, human waste, metals, and electronics. And William, like many service members, didn't know the dangers of burn pits exposure. After serving his country with honor, he returned home to Texas, and he soon met the love of his life, Melanie, and they would marry, buy a home, and start living their American dream. Soon after his marriage, William developed a sore on his tongue, but he struggled to get an appointment with the VA, and when he did, it confirmed his worst fear, cancer. He would receive treatment at Brooke Army Medical Center, where the doctors would perform a miracle throat cancer treatment, and William beat cancer. But then, a few years later, he received terrible news during a VA checkup. He had 2 tumors in his lungs, and he would need immediate treatment. But then, making matters worse, he received a letter from the VA denying his service-connected disability claim. This time around, the immunotherapy would not be as successful, and his cancer spread. On March 4th, 2019, in San Antonio, Texas, William died, and our nation lost a hero. His mother, Rose, who I had the pleasure of speaking with, calls him William, my hero. Marine Corporal William Godsa, Jr. deserved better. I hope William's story creates an urgency in Congress to address this generation's Agent Orange. Burn pits have destroyed service members' lives and American families. Let's not let another veteran receive a denial of benefits letter. Let's work together to honor our nation's sacred obligation to our men and women in uniform. I yield back.
I now yield to my friend and colleague, Congressman Bill Arakis from Florida, a member of the bipartisan Congressional Burn Pits Caucus and a fierce advocate for our veterans.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much. I want to thank my good friend, Dr. Ruiz, for organizing this very important special order. And sir, I know you're a terrific doctor, and the fact that you sacrificed to be here to complete the mission, and I appreciate it so very much. I have a similar story as well, but we must complete this mission as soon as possible. And as Jennifer said, this is the Agent Orange of our era. Providing the care and support for our veterans, our nation's heroes, has been one of my top priorities since I was elected to Congress. And I will continue to fight to ensure that our veterans get the benefits they deserve. As a matter of fact, after one of our hearings a few years ago on the VA committee, we had many veterans that were exposed to Agent Orange, and their families were present with them. Their children were present with them. And I invited them into my office. One-on-one, they told me the stories of what would happen, and the spouses will tell me, you know, my husband, my wife was exposed, and now he or she can't work. Who's going to support the family? What's going to happen to these children if their father or mother passes away? Who's going to take care of them? They need health care now. They need their benefits now. We can't wait any longer, Mr. Speaker or Madam Speaker. Burn pits are the Agent Orange of our era, as Jennifer said, and the fact that we haven't resolved the issue of burn pit exposure is an absolute disservice to our nation, disservice to our veterans, and they were exposed, and we must help them. I've fought for over multiple Congresses with my colleague, Dr. Ruiz, and my colleague, Brad Winstrom from the great state of Ohio, leading and sponsoring numerous pieces of legislation to get toxic exposed veterans the treatment and benefits they deserve, because many cannot afford to wait any longer, as I said. Tragically, one of our veterans who came to me a few years ago, Lauren Price, and we made it our mission, similar to Dr. Louise and Jennifer, we made it our mission to get this done. During Lauren's service to our country, she was exposed to burn pits. This past spring, she sadly passed away due to an illness linked to her burn pit exposure, but not before taking up the cause for her fellow veterans to make sure they or their families would not have to experience the same suffering she and her family experienced. Lauren knew that she was going to pass away, but she wanted to make it better for her fellow veterans. And her goal was to pass this legislation and similar legislation that Dr. Ruiz and I have co-sponsored over the years. I was incredibly moved to see her husband and my good friend, Jim Price, continue this tireless advocacy by testifying as a witness before the Veterans Affairs Committee just this past year in support of the TEAM Act, which would comprehensively address toxic exposures now and in the future. This critical bill adopts provisions from my legislation that I previously authored, the Protection for Veterans Burn Pit Exposure Act. I urge Congress to take it up and pass the TEAM Act immediately. If we're going to be spending money, Madam Speaker, let's spend it on our heroes. I'm also proud to co-lead a host of additional burn pit legislative fixes with Dr. Ruiz and urge immediate action in the House and the Senate on H.R. 4398, H.R. 4397, H.R. 2432, and H.R. 2371. While both H.R. 4398 and H.R. 4397 were included in the House version of the NDAA, we must continue pushing until they are across the finish line and signed by the President. Again, I thank you. I thank my good friend Dr. Ruiz for organizing this special order. I can't think of a more worthy cause than providing for these veterans in their time of need, just as they provided for our country when we needed them. Let's get this done for our veterans. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I yield back.
Thank you. I now yield to Congressman Ryan of Ohio, who I am proud to have joined me as a co-sponsor of the Honoring Our Pact Act and a member of the bipartisan Burn Pits Caucus.
Madam Speaker, I want to thank the gentleman from California for his leadership. I want to thank Chairman Takano, who's been responsible for really taking care of the veterans. He helped us rename our clinic back in Youngstown after Carl Nunziato, who's a tremendous Vietnam veteran. And I also want to thank the gentleman from Cincinnati, my home state, for being a part of all of this and being a leader in all of this. I want to thank him for that. Madam Speaker, I rise tonight in honor of the memory of Ohio Army Guardsman Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson. I met Heath's daughter, Brielle, a few months back and heard the story of Heath from his mother-in-law, Susan. And these stories, as you've heard tonight, are heartbreaking. Because when you look at Brielle and his wife, Danielle, this is more than just, we've got to get something fixed to take care of a veteran who served their country. This is the modern version of Agent Orange. But this is bringing so much heartbreak to so many families, to so many communities. In states like Ohio, where we have so many veterans who served their country. And on March 21st, 2017, Heath and his wife Danielle were sitting in an exam room at Zagmeister Cancer Center in Columbus, Ohio, when Heath was given a terminal diagnosis. He had only 6 weeks to live. At only 35 years old, Heath was suffering from gushing nosebleeds and bleeding from his ears. Dozens of doctors were unable to provide answers, but they all did have one question: what in the hell have you been exposed to? And it turns out that Heath, a combat medic, had spent every day for 3 months within 15 yards of a massive burn pit at Camp Liberty complex in Iraq. And Heath was afflicted with a rare autoimmune disease that mostly strikes elderly women and is in an extremely rare form of lung cancer that, according to 20 oncologists, could have only been caused by a prolonged exposure and inhalation of toxic substances. Madam Speaker, how can we pretend that both the VA and that we as a nation do not owe veterans like Heath and their families both the care and the benefits that they have earned, often with their very lives? This is not who we are as a country. We've got to fix this in Congress, and the time is now. Not next year, not 5 years from now, but now, right now. And service members like Heath and countless others, thousands, maybe tens of thousands, spent the last 20 years fighting our nation's longest war. We cannot turn our backs on them. I've introduced legislation to help collect the data so that the VA has it, and that every 3 months they report to this Congress as to what the data is and what the claims are, so we can hold them accountable. Most importantly, I want to thank Danielle, I want to thank Susan, and I want to let Brielle and Danielle and Susan know and their family that there are so many prayers coming to them from this Congress, but we're going to get it done, and we're going to get it done soon. And it's going to be a bipartisan effort with guys like the gentleman from Cincinnati and the gentleman from California, myself. Let's get this thing done. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to yield 1 minute to the co-chair of the Burn Pits Bipartisan Caucus, and then another minute to our colleague, Congressman Peter Wells. First.
I thank the gentleman. Madam Speaker, we're here tonight to recognize, bring awareness to our service members who are dealing with health issues caused by exposure to burn pits and other toxins during their tour of duty. These brave men and women answered the call. They were willing to lay down their lives for our freedom, and they served us honorably. Unknowingly, by following orders, they put themselves in harm's way. As our military continues to adapt, we are learning that certain amounts of exposure to burn pits can potentially present troublesome and life-threatening health challenges, some that don't show up until later in life. When I served in Iraq, I smelled the smoke, and I don't wish it upon anyone. Those suffering from the repercussions of burn pit exposure need help, not hurdles. We must meet them with compassion, not red tape. That's why I'm proud to work with fellow members of the Burn Pit Caucus, as well as friends on the Veterans Affairs Committee, to put bipartisan solutions to help our service members. We must prevent this in the future and care for those that have borne the battle. I want to thank my friend Dr. Ruiz for hosting this special order. I'm proud to work with him on this issue, as I have been proud to work with him on so many other issues on behalf of patients. With that, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. What's the remaining time? We have 1 minute left of speaking. Okay, then I would like to address Congressman Stryker to see if in his moment he can give, thank you. He would like to give 1 more minute to honor our burn pit exposed veterans.
Vermont, seek
to address the
recognition.
House for 1 minute, revise and extend.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, Vermonters have done their full measure of service throughout our history, and that's true in Iraq and Afghanistan. And 2 of our great soldiers, Sergeant Major Michael Cram and Brigadier General Michael Heston, both died of cancers that we believe were related to their exposures to burn pits. Their wonderful widows, Pat Cram and June Heston, have been so vigilant and energetic in putting a focus on the devastation of these burn pits and played a major role in encouraging the VA to A, get a registry, B, the Defense Department to stop exposing people to burn pits, and then C, to have us presume that those who have been exposed to burn pits and develop a disease as a result of that are entitled to VA benefits. We must get this done. I yield back.
The gentleman's time's expired. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 4th, 2021, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert, for 30 minutes.